Jimmy? No, well, I just yeah, I'm not going to be able to hear you until you're added to out here. Well, let me try this right now. See if you can you hear me through the computer right now? Good afternoon, everyone. I'm John Ricco, Executive Director of the Architectural Precast Association. Thank you for joining us for our webinar today, Color Outside the Lines, Color in Architectural Precast. I think you're really going to enjoy this one. But before we dive into it, I just wanted to spend a few minutes to talk about a few upcoming events and pieces of information regarding the APA. We have our annual convention coming up in just a few weeks in Long Beach, California. We hope to see many of you out there. In addition to that, 1 month from today, we have the ABCs of PLCs, another webinar where we'll talk about Portland limestone cements. And then finally, mark your calendar for 2023, where we'll have our annual spring workshop in Opelika, Alabama. Just a little bit about the annual convention. We've got some great speakers lined up to talk about leadership, to talk about the future of the precast and the construction markets. We'll also have some discussions on UHPC, ultra high performance concrete, and how you can work with that product as a precaster. We'll have roundtable discussions and a whole bunch of fun activities. So we hope to see you out there. In addition to that, we'll have some great plant tours. We'll tour APA member plant QCP just outside of Long Beach. And then we will also tour Moonlight Molds, which does a ton of both internal and external architectural precast, GFRC, GRG, and a whole bunch of different products. So we're looking forward to the convention and hope to see you out there. As I mentioned, 1 month from today, October 27th, we will have another webinar about Portland limestone cement. So we hope you can participate and join in that session. And then just a little bit of an overview, we're still mapping out the final educational programming for the spring workshop in Opelika, Alabama in 2023, but it will mainly focus on problem solving from the plant floor, how you can identify problems, identify solutions for those problems, hopefully identify them quickly so a small problem doesn't become a big problem, that sort of thing. So we hope you can join us at that particular meeting coming up in 2023. And then finally, we've got a bunch of resources on the APA website. Since we're talking about color today, we issued a technical bulletin on color last year, which talks about color choice in the production the production process. And it's a really good tool for you to provide specifiers so they can learn a little bit more about color and architectural precast. So I think that's it for the announcements. So now we'll move on to our webinar. Let me go ahead and introduce our presenter. All right, so I am going to introduce our speaker, our presenter today. But before I do that, I do want you to know that if you have any questions throughout the webinar, there will be instructions as to how you can submit questions either through YouTube or how you can email them to us. So just look for those. If you have questions, jot them down. And when you see that those instructions pop up, you'll be able to go ahead and send them in to us, and we'll ask them at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, Jimmy Crawford, who is our presenter today. Jimmy joined Dynamic Color Solutions in April of 2013. And is primarily responsible for the identification and cultivation of future growth markets for DCS. He's actively involved in several trade associations across the industries in which DCS operates, and he handles primarily project management and implementation for all IT projects for DCS's color dispensing systems. He's got a graduate degree in information systems, and Jimmy brings a fresh perspective to the DCS leadership team. So with that, I'm going to click a few buttons here, Jimmy, and you should be good to go.
Awesome. Thanks, John. Really appreciate that introduction. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. As John mentioned, my name is Jimmy Crawford with Dynamic Color Solutions. I'm the Vice President of Development here, and today I'm going to be talking a little bit about pigment use in architectural precast. So I'll go over a little bit of the agenda today. We're going to have roughly 30 to 45 minutes of my presentation, and then we're going to leave a little bit of time at the end for questions. As John mentioned, there will be a system for submitting those questions. So agenda today, who am I? I'll give a brief introduction and to supplement what John had mentioned. I'll give a little bit of background about who DCS is, what we do in the marketplace. Then I'm going to get into some color theory stuff about the iron oxide synthetics versus natural iron oxides, the forms that they're available in, automation equipment, different forms of pigment used in automation, and the ASTM certification that governs iron oxide pigments. And then I'm going to give a few quality control best practices, just a few things that we've learned over time in the industry. Who am I? I graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee in 2010 with a Master's of Business Administration after having gotten my bachelor's in IT. I worked for Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance for 4 years as a software developer. I helped build the accounting system that their offices use. That's the extent of my accounting knowledge. So I started at DCS in 2013, served a number of different roles there. I am the third generation to own the company. My grandfather bought it in 1976. Primarily today, I serve in a sales capacity. I'm very active in trade associations, the APA being one of them, also the Precast Concrete Institute, as well as a couple others. I also deal a lot with the automation side of our business, the equipment sales and specification, as well as a couple other internal functions, marketing, IT, and our website. Talk a little bit about who DCS is as a company. We were founded in 1890. Primarily at that time, we served the foundry industry. We manufactured natural iron oxide, milled that product. Was purchased by my grandfather, James F. Crawford Sr. in 1976. And in the mid 90s, we pivoted into primarily the precast industry and started to focus much more on construction. And at that time, we changed our name from DCS to Dynamic Color Solutions. Today, precast represents about 80% of our business, with the rest being cast stone, manufactured stone veneer, building supply, and then we still have a few foundry customers as well. Who are we? We're a relatively small family owned and operated business since 1976. We are based in Milwaukee, so I always include a little Packer or Milwaukee Bucks blurb. It's football season right now, so go Pack. We've had numerous employees stay with us for an extended period of time. One of the things that's really important to us is our family culture, close-knit company who tries to, put our employees first. A lot of our employees are longstanding employees, and we're very, very grateful for the relationship that we have with those folks. Talk a little bit about our core values. We have over 4,000 formulations. We have ASTM test documents certifying that all the products that we sell into the construction industry pass the standard, and we'll get into what that standard is and who governs that and all the sort of core tenets there. Our QC program, as you can see on the right-hand side, there's two strips that we're comparing. That's a pretty unique process to us. It was tailor-made for construction in general, but specifically the precast industry. Most of our customers are making concrete for architectural purposes. So we compare concrete, colored concrete in that strip channel form to QC it. That's a pretty unique process. All of our lab services, assistance with mixed designs, all that kind of stuff is tailored pretty specifically to the precast industry. We also have marketing materials that we call ring sets for the precast industry, base color as well. Those are sales materials. We have a spectrophotometer as well in our office, and we'll get into that more, but that's the device that can measure color variation. It's the most sophisticated device that is available from a commercial standpoint, the human eye being substantially better than anything that we have invented at discerning color. Also, our customer service. We have a pretty good understanding of what not having color available or the cost of poor quality represents in the precast industry. So getting into iron oxide pigments. Iron oxide pigments are the colorants that are primarily used throughout the world in all facets. It is a small subset of pigments that are used that are suitable in concrete, but pigments in general are used in paints, coatings, plastics, glass, paper, rubber, textiles, and pretty much anything else you can imagine. Iron oxides specifically are the primary colorants for concrete. So let's get a little bit into pigment basics. There's two properties that govern all pigments. The first being tinting strength. So basically, how much of a pigment do I have to add to the mix of concrete to change its color? A pigment with greater ability to change color is said to have high tinting strength. Some have less ability to change the mix relative to how much you add to it, and that's considered to have low tinting strength. Saturation point is the point at which color intensity stops rising proportionate to the addition of pigment. So if you look at this color wheel on the right hand side of the slide, right at about, I don't know, 7 or 8 o'clock, the color stops changing, and each strip in this wheel represents a 0.25% increase in addition. So there is some point where adding more pigment doesn't change the concrete anymore. And that's what's said to be the saturation point. So there's two types of pigments, synthetic iron oxides and natural iron oxides. Synthetics are a manufactured product. They are commonly manufactured by oxidizing scrap metal under very specific pH conditions. They're available in red, yellow, and black, and they are relatively intense in color compared to natural iron oxides. So they are said to have higher tinting strength. Compared to natural iron oxides, they are also relatively expensive. I'm not going to get into any pricing or any of that kind of stuff, but just comparatively speaking. And the saturation point is around 7% for iron oxide. So beyond that, you are getting no more color change relative to how much you add. As I mentioned, they're available in red, yellow, and black. Natural iron oxides. So this is the other category that iron oxide pigments can fall into. These are naturally occurring minerals in the earth. They are dug up, they are mined from iron ore deposits, and then ground into powder. As you can see on the right-hand side is what we would call our number 25 dark buff. It's the most common selling pigment that we have. Relative to synthetics, they are relatively inexpensive. They are said to have lower tinting strength, which is not necessarily a good or a bad thing. Typically what that means is that you would add a little bit more to achieve a more intense color. But if color intensity is what you're looking for, typically synthetics are more effective and efficient at reaching that. But if you're looking for more of a pastel or earth tone shade, natural iron oxides are going to have more success on a consistent basis producing those colors. Saturation point is around 10%. So adding more than 10% is not going to achieve any more color change. We typically recommend not going over 5%. And we'll get into why. There's some strength-related stuff that we'll get into on the ASTM testing stuff. As I mentioned, they're available in pastel and earth tone shades, typically reds, browns, and yellows. There are many, many, many other pigments, most of which are not suitable in concrete. These are a few that are. These are iron oxides. Titanium dioxide is a white iron oxide. Chromium oxide is a green iron oxide. And cobalt oxide is a blue iron oxide. Why do we not typically see greens, whites, or blue concrete? Well, the reason for that is primarily cost-driven. These pigments range from anywhere to 50% to 2,500% more in cost than your typical colors. Alluded to this a little bit earlier, but there are 3 different forms that iron oxide pigments are available in. Powder, which is the most common. Liquid, which is a suspended solid product where you're basically suspending pigment in water and some other chemicals. And then granular, which is little BBs that are the pigments that encapsulated by. And we'll get into why you would look at each of those options in the next slide. Powder. Powder pigment has been used to color concrete for hundreds, if not thousands of years. So think of, rewind the clock, 2,500 years, you grind up rocks, you mix it up with your concrete, you get colored concrete. It's a similar concept today, obviously much more highly automated. It's the least expensive form of pigmentation. Now, why is that? You are changing the pigment the least in powder. Anytime we change something, we obviously impart more cost into it. Basically, what you're doing is you're either oxidizing metal into a powder format on the synthetic side, or you're grinding up rocks and putting it into a bag. Either way, you're not further changing it. Both liquid and granular, there's more change after that. You are turning powder pigment into something else to make those other forms. Powder is generally available in 50-pound bags. There are some that are slightly more, slightly less as the standard size. It can obviously be rebagged into any size. Has unlimited shelf life. There's no spoilage as far, it doesn't lose its tinting strength over time or anything like that. It's best kept dry, and basically that's just to avoid clumping issues. So if it gets wet, it might ball up. Packaging options. So as I mentioned, it's typically not powder pigment typically comes in 50-pound bags, but it's obviously can be rebagged into any size, what we would call a small bag. Also available in water soluble bags. So in that particular case, let's say you need 10 pounds per yard, it can be bagged up in a 10-pound bag. You just throw a water soluble bag into the mix. It dissolves on its own. No need to cut the bag open or throw it away. It's also available in super sacks, which are generally 2,000-pound sacks. And that's more on the automation side, or sometimes if you're scooping out of a bulk container, there can be applications that makes sense. It's the widest range of colors available. Pretty much any color you can think of is available in powder. All the synthetics, all the naturals, your blues, your greens, etc. Liquid. Liquid came available in the United States sometime in the late 1980s, early 1990s. And again, this is a water-based suspension package. You are taking powder and suspending it in water. Why would you do that? Why would anybody want to liquefy? Well, there's really two reasons for that. One is automation. Powder pigments are inherently very, very difficult to automate the addition of powder pigments. They have a lot of magnetic properties. They clump. There's a lot of issues that are problematic for the automation of powder pigments. So it's liquefied because it's much easier to pump liquid iron oxides than move dry powder. So obviously with automation comes no human intervention. Obviously you don't have to have somebody physically weighing up the powder. You don't have to have somebody remembering to throw a bag into the mix. You also get independent documentation and verification. So the system says it weighs up, you call for 10 pounds, it weighs up 9.98 pounds. Every single time it's on your sheet what happened. Also, the other sort of side advantage of liquid is that it obviously concrete is a water-based material, and you are adding a water-based pigment system into the material. It will disperse in that mix much more efficiently and rapidly. Not that powder can't, it just takes a little bit more force from the mixer, more time than liquid will. Granular. So granular is the third form of powder pigment. Basically, they're small BBs. They've been used since around the 1990s, and only really within the last 5 to 10 years has this technology improved to the point that it's applicable in the architectural precast industry. Now, the issue that was sort of initially in granular, this technology came from other areas, most commonly known for like yard fertilizer. Think of like your Milorganite or those types of things that are encapsulated. Well, the shape of the BBs was not a huge issue in those industries. In concrete, in pigments, too much pigment or too little pigment is equally an equal problem. So you have to have really uniform BBs like the ones you see on the slide that are nice and round so that they slide out of the mix. You get accurate weighments every time. So that technology has really started to come around in the last 5 years, that granules can be accurately and automatically weighed by the machines available in the marketplace. Which form of pigment is best? This is the most common question that I get when I'm out in the field or giving talks like this. And the short answer is there is no best. There are 3 different options, and depending on what your application is, any one of the 3 can be the best. So I like to go over the pros and cons of each. First, when we talk about dry pigments, they're definitely the least expensive. There's no shelf life. So if you do a job that requires a pigment, and then a year later you come back and you need that same color, and that pigment has been sitting on your shelf for a year in a dry place, you can use that same color and it'll work just as effectively. No change. It's available in a wide range of colors and packaging options. The cons, as I mentioned, automation is, if it's even possible, it's very, very expensive. I have not seen in the United States a machine that can accurately weigh up dry powder. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but I haven't seen it. And the ones that I have seen in the field were very, very expensive. Secondly, it's dirty. I mean, when you open up a bag of powdered pigment, it gets everywhere. You're weighing it up, it gets on your clothes, your hands. So that's a downside. Lastly, inventorying issues. So let's say hypothetically you run a job that calls for 10 bags of something and you only use 9 of them. Well, unless you use that color again, it's kind of just sitting on your shelf. What do you do with it? Do you keep it in case you come back to that job? Do you throw it away? What do you do with it? And if you keep it, you store up enough of that over time, and now you've got all this inventory that, what do you do with it? Liquid. So obviously the biggest advantage of liquid is it introduces the whole world of automation. So you don't have to have somebody weighing up powder within your plant. Dispersion is very attractive, and the no obsolete inventory thing is huge. So at DCS, we use what's called a 5-base color system. So 3 synthetic iron oxides and 2 natural iron oxides. Out of those 5 base colors, there are thousands of combinations that you can make. So pretty much regardless of within a range, regardless of what job you're pouring, if it requires, let's say, our number 2 yellow and our number 25, and you use some of the color in a tote, well, the next job comes along, you might use 2 and 9 on that job. So now you're just kind of rolling it forward, and you only ever need to keep those 5 colors in stock. And those, there's never the situation that I talked about with dry, where you have a job that runs out, you have a little bit extra. What do you do with it? There is no extra. You just carry that forward onto the next job. The cons. Obviously, you're taking powder and you're changing it, so there's an increase in cost. Secondly is freight on water. In our particular case, our liquids are 50% solids, 50% water. So you are paying freight on water. There's just kind of no way around that. So that's an increased cost piece as well. Lastly is granular. Obviously, biggest, most attractive thing about granular is automation. Similar to liquid, there's no obsolete inventory. You got in our case, 4 colors: yellow synthetic iron oxide, a red synthetic iron oxide, a black synthetic iron oxide, and our number 25 dark buff, which is a natural iron oxide. You can use those 4 colors in any combination on any job going forward. Never, have extra that you have to throw away. The cons. Obviously, again, you're taking dry and you're putting it into you're granulating it, so there's an additional cost there. Lastly, there's a very limited color range. So on liquid, you can liquefy any color, but granular, it really only comes in those 4 options. So if you do get a job that's like a very light buff that you can't make, or it's a blue job or a green job or whatever, you're back to dry, and your hand weighing and all that expensive equipment that you have purchased is, you can't even use it. So again, which form is best? It really does depend on your operation. If you're a company that only makes 3 colors and they're, yellow, red, black, and buff, granular might be an excellent option for you. But if you're a precaster that, has architects asking for all different kinds of color combinations, and you might only do color, twice a year, maybe powder is best. Powder is the most common way to color concrete. But, it really just does depend on your particular application and your, application. Automation. So I touched on this already, but in the last 10 years or more, it's become extremely popular. Machines are generally built to order, built custom. Obviously, that's me working on one of our electrical panels. I don't do a ton of that. We have dispenser folks, but I am involved heavily on the sales side. Many equipment suppliers offer financing options. This is relatively new as well. It used to be, hey, the machine is X number of dollars, write us a check, we'll build you one. Now, pigment companies, including DCS, have become a lot more flexible about, okay, you buy X pounds per year, we'll finance the machine up front, and over a 3 to 5 year period, you'll pay us back for it, just like a leased car. Automation is available for dry, liquid, and granular. I did mention, obviously, liquid and granular are the most popular. Dry is available. Again, I'll get into it, but very expensive and not as reliable. But it's important to touch on that they do exist in the world. Basically two forms of automation. I'm going to go over each, and then I'm going to tell you kind of what DCS does and what our view is. So basically you can either weigh up the material on the ground and then blow it up to the mixer level, either with liquid or with granular. So you're weighing it up on the ground floor and then either pumping it up or blowing it up with air. Or option number two is you mount a weigh vessel above the mixer and pump the material up to that, and then it's weighed up top and then discharged by gravity or water into the mixer. We at DCS, we employ option number two, and the basic reason for that is that we want to ensure that all the material that's getting weighed up at that weigh vessel is being discharged into your mixer, and there's really no other way to do that unless you're mounting it above your mixer. Downside to that, obviously, is you got to have room in your plant, and mounting it above the mixer is costly. I mean, you have to build the necessary structure, etc. So I put the PCI standard on here. PCI MNL 116 or 117 section 4.3.1 says that powdered pigments shall be weighed up to the nearest plus or minus 1% of the required weight. This is one of the reasons why dry pigment automation is very challenging. Liquid is plus or minus 3% of accumulated weight, etc. I'm not going to read the whole thing there, but basically it's a 3% variance on liquid, 1% on dry is the PCI standard. Let's talk a little bit about liquid pigment automation. So the picture there is one of our pump racks installed in the customer's facility. Most manufacturers do a 4 synthetic color base color system, a light red, a medium red, a black, and a yellow. DCS here we employ 2 natural iron oxides. And that's a function of the desire, specifically in precast, for a lot more pastel colors, specifically with number 25 dark buff with white cement at a 3-ish% addition rate. It looks a lot like limestone, which is very popular in the precast industry. Again, traditional color systems, we have holding tanks that then pump the material and weigh it up on the ground floor and then pump it up to your mixer. They use a diaphragm system with a pulse counter to dispense the material into the hopper and then pump that up into the mixer. As I mentioned, some benefits of that system. You don't need to rotate your inventory. They're stationary tanks, as you can see, and they're easily removed. There's a trailer that you back up to the site, put the liquid in, pump it up, you're good to go. Run some hoses. The drawbacks. Variations in viscosity of the material. So basically what that means is within that tank, the material is going to have a tendency to settle out over time. So you might have liquid at the top that's, 25% solids, and at the bottom it's 75% solids because, it's really hard to agitate that much material effectively. Secondly, it's impossible to lot track. If you send 3 lots and you mix them all together, and you have a problem with the panel, it's really impossible to tell which lot is contributing to the problem. Storage tanks clog and material can grow mold easily. So these suspension packages for liquid color are organic materials. So bacteria can eat them just like it eats any other organic material. And it's, a water-based suspension package, and it's usually nice and warm in these machines. So warm, dark, organic material, moist. This is bacteria heaven. So the storage material, the storage tanks do tend to grow bacteria in them over time. The material it uses a pulse counter. So the weighment is either on the ground floor and pumps it up to the mixer, or in some cases is not weighed at all. And there's no verification that the material, once it arrives, did it arrive in the mixer? Or is it stuck in the line? You don't really know. So our system employs totes that are attached to the pump rack. As you can see, that's me standing in front of a pump rack there. You attach a tote to that pump rack. The material is then pumped up to a weigh vessel above the mixer and then discharged into the mixer. Clean water rinse to follow, obviously, so you're making sure that nothing is stuck in that vessel above the mixer. So the benefits of our DCS system, easy lot-to-lot tracking. You're hooking up a 250-gallon tote. When you're done, you disconnect it, hook up another tote. There's a sticker right on the side of the tote that says what lot it is. Definitive proof of the material addition. Whatever it weighs up is what you get. Where else could it go? There's nothing under, there's no lines or anything. There's nothing underneath it. Integration with your batch controller. So, it's really convenient to just have your operator having to touch one computer screen. Reverse flow of material. So we allow for backwards flow of the material. So you can pump the material back into a tote, wash the system out with water to make sure that you're not getting clogs in the pipes. Drawbacks. As you can see there, I am underneath this weigh vessel. This is mounted up in the air above a mixer right now. So we're 30 feet off the ground floor, roughly. We're working, it's hot, it's installations, it's a real pain. You got to get it up there. But once you do, it's kind of set it and forget it. Clean out, obviously, as I mentioned, you got to pump the lines out to wash them out, and then rotating inventory. Obviously, a 250-gallon tote, you got to disconnect it, put the next tote on versus, a 750-gallon holding tank is a lot more material. So granular, let's talk a little bit about the advantages and disadvantages of granular automation. Most equipment manufacturers use a 4-base color system similar to the liquid side, a medium red, a light red, a black, and a yellow. DCS, we use 3 synthetics, a bright red, a black, and a yellow, and then a natural dark buff. And again, the idea there is that dark buff producing that limestone color in a low addition rate with white cement. Again, 2 methodologies here, one using vibration and one using a dry to liquid system. Basically, vibration, you vibrate the trays that the granules sit in and drop them down into a weigh hopper. Liquid, similar idea. You weigh the material and then you liquefy it and then pump that liquid up to the mixer. Benefits of granular pigment. Ease of installation. What you see there is the entire system. It's much, much easier to put that into your plant. Relatively clean and lack of maintenance versus liquid. I mean, you're not having to pump the lines free because there's not, it's not a organic substance that bacteria can eat. Drawbacks. Generally speaking, granular machines are 2 to 2.5x the cost of a liquid system. And depending on the addition rate, the range of additions could be a problem. If you're using very high addition rates and very low addition rates, you may need a separate hopper, one for your smaller addition rates, one for your larger addition rates. Dry pigment automation. As I've kind of alluded to, it's not widely used in the precast industry. It's generally, the cost is typically in the $150,000 plus range. The systems that I have seen use micro screws to dose the pigment. So they're like turning and like kind of dropping little, dustings of the pigment to get those small addition rates. Aside from the cost, the general issue is the range of weighments, similar to the granular side, that it's not uncommon, especially in the precast industry, that you might weigh up less than 1 pound of material in one mix and greater than 150 pounds of material in another mix. And I like to put this last bullet point on the presentations. If a system were available at a competitive price, dry pigment automation would be the ideal color solution from a pure color theory perspective. You're starting, when you make pigment, it starts in dry, so it's the lowest cost to start with. And then when we change something, you are imparting more complexity into the product. If the simplest solution would just be, how does it start out? Let's add it in that form. Unfortunately, to my knowledge, that doesn't exist, but if it does, definitely be very interesting, not just for the precast industry, but for a number of industries as well. ASTM C979. I touched on this earlier. This is the standard, the ASTM standard specification for integrally colored concrete. All pigments used in concrete should pass ASTM C979. There are 9 tests that are included that pigments need to pass in order to prove that they can perform well in concrete. The maximum prescribed addition rate, according to ASTM C979, is 10% of your cementitious weight. So basically, that's a fancy way of saying, if you have 100 pounds of cement, don't add more than 10 pounds or less of cement. Does this pass ASTM C979? So what are the 9 tests? Water wettability, alkali resistance, total sulfates, water solubility, atmospheric curing, which I'll touch on a little bit more in a minute, light resistant, effect on the setting of concrete, air content, and effect on compressive strength. So what do all those 9 mean? Water wettability, you cannot have a hydrophobic iron oxide pigment in your mix. Why? Well, concrete has water in it, so you can't have oil going into your concrete, and it has to be able to mix with water. Alkali resistance, obviously, concrete is a very caustic environment. You can't have something that's going to break down in that environment. Total sulfates, you cannot be adding, obviously, for efflorescence issues, you can't be adding excessive sulfates into the mix. Water solubility, product has to be water soluble. Atmospheric curing. So basically, this is the idea that if you pour a piece of concrete with iron oxide pigments in it, 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, the color cannot fade. So if you look at a building that's 20 years old, and the surface of that building color may change due to rain, or it's dirty, or whatever the case may be. But if you break that piece of concrete in half, the color on the inside should be exactly the same as the day you poured it. Well, not the day that it finished curing. Light resistance, it can't fade in the sun. Effect on the setting of concrete. There is, you cannot cause a material delay in the set time of concrete. It cannot have too much or change the air content of the product too much or too little. Effect on compressive strength. So if you press down you put your concrete in the chamber, you press down on it too hard till it cracks, you cannot cause an effect on compressive strength. All the pigments that DCS sells and are commonly used in the industry should pass ASTM C979 when used in the prescribed dosing rates. Color samples, I included the PCI color and texture guide here. Color addition. We generally recommend staying between a 1% and a 5% addition rate. Well, why is that? Well, less than 1%, it becomes difficult to control the addition of minor ingredients. So let's say you're doing a 1% addition rate. You have 100 pounds of cement, and you're doing a 0.5% addition rate. So your total addition is 1/2 of a pound. But of that 1/2 pound, let's say you're using a blend of 3 different colors, and one of those colors is a 10% minor ingredient of that color. Now you need to weigh 0.05 pounds accurately and consistently to produce consistent concrete. Very difficult to achieve. Greater than 5%, you don't want to go too much over 5 for a variety of reasons. One being saturation point, but also over a 5% addition rate can have an effect on your compressive strength or increase the set time of a piece. Looks like we have a question there that I'll get to. Does mixing time change the color of the mix for powder or liquid? I'll circle back to that question. That's a great question. Thank you, Mark. All pigments pass C979 at 10%, except for burnt umber and synthetic yellow iron oxide pass at 7%. I'm not going to get too much into this. This is kind of a color nerd thing, but the shape of the color particle, synthetic yellow iron oxide, is like a needle-shaped particle, and that is believed to be the reason why synthetic yellow doesn't pass at a higher percent addition rate. The short answer, Mark, I'll touch on this question now, I guess. Mark Fairman asks, does mixing time change the color of the mix for powder or liquid? The short answer is no. As long as you mix it sufficiently, which it does depend a little bit on your operation, what kind of mixer you're using. I would say 60 to 90 seconds should be sufficient. As long as you're mixing it sufficiently, the end resulting color should be the same. If you're under mixing, then that can be a problem, regardless of if it's powder or liquid. Hope that answered your question. I talked a little bit about our internal QC program, but any material that DCS ships must pass our internal QC process. We keep lot samples of everything that we've made for at least 3 years. So every powder that we send, liquid that we send, granule that we send, we keep a small jar of that in our lab so that we can pull that out if there's ever a problem, or if we need to make another lot to match that. We pull that out, check it against the new mix that we're making. As you can see, Tim, who's our plant manager, is visually inspecting those 2 strips to compare and make sure that the lot matches the new mix that we're making. We also have a spectrophotometer available, but similar to in the airport, if you've ever seen a dog there, there's all the technology in the world, but there is no technology that we have invented that's as advanced as the human eye for checking color. Similarly, the dog's nose is more advanced than any technology that mankind has come up with yet. Pigment QC continued here. Always include when you're making a mix the color number and the lot number used. I strongly recommend replacing your 12 by 12s every year, so that in the event that there is a lot change over time, you're not getting too far away from that mix. We always recommend letting samples cure for at least 1 week, because that's when the majority of your color change is going to occur. Particularly true with gray cement, particularly true with gray cement containing synthetic iron oxide. I'm a big fan of range panels. I know that that's not viable for all precasters, but I just feel like range panels really sort of set the stage for a conversation with an architect to say, these are naturally occurring materials that came from Mother Nature. Not every panel is going to look exactly the same. Color evaluation. It's critical to only evaluate pigment when it is being mixed with concrete. In the dry state, the liquid state, or the granular state, you look at two pigments, they may very well look different, but when you mix them in concrete, they may very well produce the same color. Very common question that I get. I touched on that. Resulting concrete will produce the same finished colored concrete. Cement. In general, we strongly advise using a single type and brand of cement. If you are going to switch between jobs, a change in color cement manufacturer will cause color variation during a job. I'm probably preaching to the choir in this particular presentation, but white cement is always more closely color controlled than gray cement. Some cement suppliers, I'm not exactly sure what their QC process is for gray. I know it's reliably controlled for white. Other pozzolanic materials such as fly ash or slag, kind of a mixed bag. Some are going to be more closely color controlled. Some are going to be less color controlled. Mixing. So this gets into your question, Mark, which is why I was going to wait on it, but I touched on it a little bit. Always add color at the same point in the mixing process. That's a theme that you're going to see throughout these sort of quality control oriented slides. Consistency in your process will contribute to more consistently colored concrete. The best way to achieve color consistency is consistency in the other areas and your other processes throughout the plant. Best practice, add your aggregate, add your sand, your color, and then cement. You want to get a good, if you add in that order, you're going to get a good mix of your aggregate and cement and color before the sand hits it. That'll give you good color dispersion. Critical to keep your mix time consistent. And as I mentioned prior, the biggest problem that we see is undermixing. Undermixing can result in streaks or blotches of color, especially when you only use a small quantity of color in the batch. I have a question here. Related consistency question from email. Occasionally, we have a hard time controlling the consistency of our light buffs. Any thoughts on how to improve consistency? Absolutely. I have a few thoughts. One, my question would be, what is the formulation of the buff? If you're making buff using a red, yellow, and black synthetic iron oxide blend, you're going to have more difficulty controlling for color than if you use a natural iron oxide. Why is that? You start with red, yellow, black synthetic versus starting with a buff pigment. You're starting with the synthetic way further away from your ending point. We are a big fan of starting with the end in mind. So you're trying to make a buff color. Why not start with a buff pigment? I would also definitely, I had more questions about, are you using gray cement versus white cement? Obviously, definitely strongly recommend white cement. Beyond that, there's lots of factors that go into it. Finishing is a factor. I might also look at the addition of trim water being a factor. There's lots of things. Looks like we have another question, but I'm gonna keep moving and come back to that. Finish, as I was just saying to and speaking to in the question, finish of concrete has a profound impact on the color of the finish. Form finish, I strongly recommend not doing a form finish. You're going to get a lot of the paste on the surface of the concrete is going to have extreme color variation. We recommend pretty much any textured finish over a form finish. Raked, form liner, retarded, sandblasted, acid etched. Testing with an acid etched finish is important. You want to be consistent with your etching is the idea there. Excessive etching is going to, cause a color variation as opposed to a light etch. Moisture control. So this is probably the most controversial slide in my presentation. Testing has been done to indicate that water to cement ratio does not have a material impact on the color of concrete over a long enough time frame. So translation, a large swing in your water to cement ratio over time should not have an impact on your color. Having said that, I have not found that to be consistently accurate in the field. So again, this goes back to having consistent process and control over your concrete is critical. One of the biggest things I'm a fan of is moisture probes and the removal of, I see it all the time in plants that I go into. There's a hose on the mixer stand. The batch plant operator has the authority to determine if the mix is too dry, if the mix is too wet, they'll add more trim water, etc. That variability from batch to batch, I believe, is contributory in color variation as it relates to water to cement ratio. This is kind of touching on what I just said. It's critical to remove the ability for the batch plant operator to add discretionary trim water. Increasing trim water increases water to cement variation. Overall control of the mix is key to making consistent colored concrete, just like it's key to producing any other consistent colored concrete. One last little tidbit. In general, higher water to cement ratios produce lighter colors. Conversely, lower to water cement ratios produce darker colors as a general rule. Looks like I have a question here from Larry Rowland. Are there any third-party companies that supply a tank system for liquid that include an agitator to keep solids in suspension? Yes. I've seen burping systems. So basically you're pushing air into the bottom of the tank. And the idea there is to kind of move the pigment around. Two concerns with that system. One, the air that you're imparting into that system, kind of who knows what it's got in it. There could be oil, there could be other bacteria, etc. So you're imparting bacteria into it. Secondly, I question whether or not that an air bubble system has the force necessary to properly agitate and mix the material. We strongly recommend they're air mixers that you insert into the top of the tote, they rotate around, you run them on a timer, and that does a much better job of keeping the product in suspension. How small have you seen these liquid systems go? Can we use 5-gallon pails Can we use 5-gallon pails of pigment? Yeah, you can discharge into a 5-gallon pail. Generally speaking, we recommend with our system a 2-pound minimum. That's a 1-pound dry weight basis because obviously 50% water, so it's 1 pound of dry powder. Going back to that, it looks like that question's in there twice. So yeah, you could discharge that into a pail, carry it out into, if you're batching, mixing from a truck, or you have, mixers far away, that's an option. Efflorescence, what is it? Efflorescence is a change on the surface of the powdery substance upon exposed to air. It's caused by basically crystalline salt encapsulated in the mix. Where does it come from? It's basically the excess of free salts in your raw materials. How to mitigate? Low alkali cement will help. Wash sand will help. Fly ash tends to be high in encapsulated salts. So I would recommend getting away from that. Color can accentuate appearance of efflorescence. So basically what that is meant to say is, you have white concrete, just plain white concrete. There's white salt on top. Well, it's like seeing a polar bear in a snowstorm. It's not going to jump off the page. But if you color that concrete red, now all of a sudden those white splotches just jump off the page. We have had a lot of luck with this EcoChem product. I don't make any money from that. I don't represent them, but they've had good success in after the fact mitigating efflorescence. So I just stick that on there as a general tip for producers. Conclusions. What is possible? Color consistency is definitely possible. As you can see, this beautiful building, diverse, attractive edifices are possible. A wide range of colors, finishes, and reveals are possible. How do we achieve this? One, color consistency is just like any other form of consistency. The more you do the same over and over and over again, the more repeatable the process becomes, the more consistent the product is going to become. Communication with the architect is key. I strongly recommend 12 by 12s and range panels, and that's mostly about level setting expectations with your architect. Controlling plant processes in general will improve color consistency, and I always put automation on here. I'm a big fan of automation. I know if I did the same thing 100 times in a day, I might get it right 99 times, but that one time, you can't afford to be wrong one time, and the computer will do it the same 100 times out of 100. With that, I want to thank you guys for your attention, and I believe we'll do a little bit of a Q&A here. I know I touched on a couple questions already, but John, are there any other questions that we've gotten?
Yes, let me, a couple of them came in through via email. So this one's kind of has a long preface and then a couple questions. So I'm just going to read it. When architects want an extremely dark color, we sometimes decline to bid on the job due to problems associated with dark colors. We'll later see that one of our competitors produced the dark precast, but a few years after installation, the color seems noticeably lighter. Two questions. What tips can you give for achieving darker colors? And two, what happened to that quote unquote faded color?
I'll answer the first question first. What tips can you give for darker colors? Obviously, high addition rate of pigment is door number one. So I would recommend attempting with a 5% addition rate. I also would strongly recommend matching your aggregate to the final color that you're trying to achieve. So you want black concrete, I would recommend a high addition rate of black pigment, match it with black aggregate. Pivoting to the second part of that question, what caused that building to fade? If I had to guess, I would say that this was probably a black building, and your competitor probably used what's called a carbon black. So from a pure color perspective, carbon black is the blackest black that is available. The downside of carbon black is in 5 to 7 years, somewhere in there, maybe longer, the color is going to have a tendency to fade from the surface of the piece. You crack it in half, it'll still be jet black on the inside, but on the front, you're going to get more of a brownish tone. That product is not suitable for the use in concrete. So I hope that answers your question. Looks like we got a question from Mark Fairman. What is the saturation point of liquid number 25 pigment? 5%. We do not recommend adding over 5%. The saturation point is somewhere in that 7% range. So more than 7, you're probably not going to get any bang for your buck. But we recommend sticking to 5 because you're really not getting much more. The 5 to 7% window is not going to achieve much of a color change for you. We recommend staying under
5. Jimmy, I've got another question here through email. Are there any QC recommendations that you have from your experience that you didn't hit on in the presentation?
Yeah, I have a few. One, I touched on color consistency quite a bit. I touched on mock-ups and 12 by 12s. One little small tip that I picked up at a plant that I thought was a really clever idea. If you're using gray cement and you're doing architectural with gray, sometimes unavoidable, I get that. This particular plant keeps a graduated cylinder, and every time they get a delivery of gray, they put a sticker on the side and put an inch of gray pigment or gray cement in the cylinder. So you'll get, September 1st, September 5th, September 10th, September 15th, and you'll see that color variation over time. And so it really enables you then to track your color changes, make any mix design change, if you have to adjust your mix a little bit, have to adjust your pigment a little bit. And it also just gives you as a producer an idea of how much variation am I actually getting in gray or even in white, delivery to delivery. I thought that was a very clever idea. We actually do that in our plant now.
Very good. Thanks, Jimmy. I do not see any other email questions. We'll give folks just another second or two. If you have a question you want to have answered, please go ahead and post it in the chat or send it in. And let's see.
Nice comment there from Larry Rowland. Appreciate that. Thank you,
All
everyone,
right.
for your time and attention. And
Well,
thank you to
appreciate
John
it, Jimmy. Yeah, thank you for joining us today and going through this and giving us a little bit of education on color and how to keep it consistent and all that good stuff. We appreciate it very much, Jimmy. And for all of those of you out there participating, we appreciate you joining us today. We will record this and make it available on the YouTube channel shortly after this broadcast date. And we hope to see you next month, October 27th, for the ABCs of PLC Portland Limestone Cement. Thanks, everyone, and thank you very much, Jimmy.
Take care. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.